5 seconds to go. Start. Sir, there are 3 items which are covered by this bill. I support the 3 items because this bill symbolizes and represents a new national development of having a consensus on certain basic questions. It is also a happy augury that the approach is not a negative approach, and it is not being said that the preamble of the Constitution, in so far it has been changed by the 42nd Amendment in respect of its secular or socialist character, shall go. It is not said that the list of fundamental duties shall go. It is not said that the directive principles which were amended to provide for workers' representation or for legal aid or for conservation of natural resources will go. That is a healthy development. So far as the Congress party is concerned, it has approached the question with an open mind. Regarding the government proposal with regard to internal security, the Congress party has made it clear as a result of experience that it is opposed to internal disturbances as such, and it is against the retention of a clause as to internal disturbances in the event of the armed rebellion. As a result of recent experience, we, as the Congress party, stand by those provisions of the 42nd Amendment, such as the amendment to the preamble or the directive principles, and we also say that there should be no power in Parliament to declare an internal emergency. But I would like the law minister to consider this question not merely from the point of view of the 42nd Amendment, but from the point of view that the Constitution should become a dynamic instrument of socio-economic change to deal with the basic questions that are before the nation. Why did we think of the constitutional amendments? Why did the first constitutional amendment come? Why did Panditji come to Parliament with the first constitutional amendment? It was because our our legislation for the abolition of Jamidari was struck down. Why did Pandit Nehru come to Parliament in 1955 with the fourth constitutional amendment? Again, it was because our socio-economic legislations were struck down. Therefore, when we consider a constitutional amendment, we have to consider the problems that had arisen. Certain property rights, which became part of the fundamental rights, had stood in the way of various socio-economic legislations like land reforms, etc. Sir, we find that in the Golak Nath's case, it was laid down that Parliament had no power to alter the fundamental rights, which included the right to property. Sir, you would recall in the Golak Nath's case, the justice had said that if the aim was to introduce a socialistic pattern of society, then it was a mistake to incorporate property as a fundamental right. It is that mistake which was revealed in 1950 when land legislations were struck down. It is that mistake which was revealed in 1953 when in Bela Banerjee's case the Supreme Court said that full compensation has to be paid. It is to rectify that mistake that in 1955 Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru introduced the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. It is that mistake that resulted in the setting aside by the Supreme Court in February 1970 of the Banks Nationalisation Act. It is that mistake that resulted in setting aside in December 1970 of the provision for the abolition of the privy purses. Today, sir, when we discuss this question, we have to discuss the basic question of the conflict that arose as a result of Golak Nath's case, by which the property right became supreme and by which the power of Parliament to amend was nullified. With regard to that, we must have a fresh look. The Supreme Court in that important case tried to take a second look and overruled the Golak Nath's case, and that there is a concept of the basic structure of the Constitution. What happened in the Golak Nath's case? Parliament's right to amend the Constitution, the fundamental right, was taken away. In that important case, a doctrine of basic structure was introduced, but the doctrine of basic structure, as now developed by the Supreme Court, is undefined and it is unchannelized. The question has now come before the Parliament to finally decide on these basic questions. First, we have to decide what is this basic structure. There has been two urges before the Parliament. One is the socialistic urge to fight against inequality and to introduce socio-economic legislation. The obstacle here has been the fundamental right to property. There is another urge of Parliament, that is the democratic urge to preserve life and liberty. This should also be given place in our Constitution by the Indian Parliament. The property right, which stood in the way of bank nationalisation, stood in the way of abolition of the privy purses and also stood in the way of abolition of the jamidari system that has to go in totality. Stop.